is the verification of it. And also in NXOS2, in switch B, show IP router EIGRP can show us that we learned quad 1, and now we have connectivity ping quad 2 with the source of loopback 0. Okay, with the source interface of loopback 0, or you can use with the source of, for example, quad 2. We should use ping quad 1, okay, because it's switch 2 with the source of, for example, quad 2. After some second, we have connectivity. Very good. And you know that, for example, for configuring every routing protocol, we have some optional parameters. First optional parameter is the, for example, router ID. In NXOS, the router ID of EIGRP, the unique identifier of EIGRP in one switch, is determined by this, for example, methods. The first method is configuring the EIGRP EIGRP router ID manually. If you configure the EIGRP router ID manually with this command, router ID ABCD, for example, let me to show you, router EIGRP Arash, okay, then the address family IPv4 unicast, address family IPv4 unicast, okay, EIGRP router ID, you can use the router ID command and configuring, for example, quad 1. The router ID is the router ID that now is router ID of administratively configured. The first and the highest priority method is this method, configuring manually the router ID. But if you don't configure the router ID manually, the router ID is selected from the IP address of the loopback 0, if you have loopback 0. If you don't have loopback 0, other loopbacks, okay, IP address can be selected. For example, first loopback numbers IP address should be selected. And if you don't have loopback interfaces, the first interface, the first physical interface, for example, facet and 00, ETH00, 00's IP address should be selected as the router ID. The first priority is manual. The second priority is the IP address of the loopback. And after that, the IP address of the other interface, other loopback interfaces with the lowest number. And after that, if you don't have loopback interface, the IP address of the other the first physical interface. And it's better to configure router ID manually. EIGRP router ID quad 1 now is configured here, and also in NXOS2 conf D. Router EIGRP Arash address family IPv4 unicast, router ID, for example, quad 2. You can see router ID in EIGRP in many show command. For example, you know that we can see EIGRP topology table with the show IP EIGRP topology. Okay, let me to show you. Show IP EIGRP topology show us the same topology with the iOS for the EIGRP, same topology table, and you can see here the router ID is quad 1 in switch 1, and also show IP EIGRP topology in switch 2 can show us that the router ID is quad 2. Because of that, you can configure the router ID, and it's the best practice to configuring the router ID. That's it. And also, you know that in EIGRP, because we are using the highest bandwidth interfaces, it's better to using the wide metric. The wide metric configuration in EIGRP enabled with this command, metric version 64-bit. This is different command with the iOS. Let me to show you here. I can use the metric, okay, version 64-bit. Don't forget, wide metric and narrow metric in the EIGRP compatible with each other. Metric version 64-bit now is enabled in switch A, and show, for example, IP protocol. And let me to show you, show IP EIGRP topology first. Topology, look at here. In show IP EIGRP topology, now we have the wide metric here in the NXOS1, but in NXOS2, show IP EIGRP topology can show us that, for example, we have the narrow metric parameters. But it's better to configuring the same type of metric calculation. For example, in switch B I'm using the metric then version 64-bit. Okay, metric version 64-bit. Show IP EIGRP. Show IP EIGRP. Here we can find the metric version now is 64-bit. Let me first remove the command no metric version 64-bit. Okay, again show IP EIGRP. Here metric version is 32-bit. After that, IP metric version 64-bit can show us that we are using the white metric. It's better to configuring the white metric for the EIGRP. Okay, let me to review the show IP EIGRP result. EIGRP AS1 with the router ID of quad 2 with the in the VRF default is configured. The process tag is Arash. The instance number is 1. The status running. What is the status? EIGRP now is enabled. If you want to disable EIGRP for any reason, you can use the shutdown command. Shutdown. After that, show IP EIGRP neighbors. We don't have neighborship. Show IP EIGRP. Show us that the status is shut down. If you need to disable EIGRP without removing the configuration, you can use this command. Let me to enable the EIGRP again. No shutdown. Show IP EIGRP neighbors. We have neighborship. Show IP EIGRP. Show us that the EIGRP status is running. We didn't enable authentication. I will talk about the authentication and also authentication keychain in the future videos. Also, the metric weights has K1, K2, K3, K4, and K5. Because we enabled the metric style of the 64-bit white metric, we have K6 also. You know that for K6, EIGRP uses the jitter and also energy. And also the rebase scale is 128, metric version 64-bit. The EIGRP is a protocol with the protocol number of 88, and the multicast group that EIGRP hellos should be sent to, that multicast group is 224.0.0.10. This is the reserved multicast group IP address for EIGRP. The administrative distance for internal EIGRP routes is 90, and an administrative distance for external EIGRP route is 170, such as the iOS. Maximum pass for load balancing in NXOS is 8, and you can configure the different value. Active time is the 3 minutes, such as the iOS. Okay, number of EIGRP interfaces in this scenario is 2, and also one of them is loopback. Number of EIGRP passive interface, we didn't enable the passive interface. In the future videos, I'm going to show you the passive interfaces. Number of EIGRP peers is 1. We didn't enable graceful, we didn't enable, but it's enabled by default. We didn't enable stop routing in this scenario. And also, for example, we didn't enable the redistribution maximum prefix feature. That's it. Now we learned about the metric version also. In EIGRP, if you need to see the, for example, change in the adjacency, you should use the Log-Adjacency-Change command, and also you should enable it on the, for example, NXOS2 if you need to see the result of change in adjacency in both switches. Log-Adjacency-Change. This is the command, you can use it. And I talked about the shutdown for disabling the OSPF or EIGRP. Finally, show IP EIGRP interface, show IP EIGRP neighbors, show IP EIGRP topology, and show IP route EIGRP. And finally, show running config EIGRP can show us the EIGRP configuration, EIGRP different tables. And for example, the first is the command for checking the EIGRP enabled on which interfaces. The second command is the checking or finding the EIGRP neighborship table. And the third is for checking and verifying the EIGRP topology table. Show IP route EIGRP can show us the routing table learned from the EIGRP. Show running config EIGRP can show us the configured command for the EIGRP. So easy. Interface ETH, for example, 2.1, okay, IP EIGRP. We have some commands here, IP EIGRP Arash, for example, shutdown. If you want, you can disable EIGRP on one interface only, not on all interfaces. Show IP EIGRP Arash now is shut down in this interface. show IP EIGRP. Look at here, interface brief. EIGRP is